Evangelicalish, where we discuss the good, the bad, and the ugly of the American evangelical church, deconstruction, faith, and God's love through it all. And make sure and stay current on ish happenings on Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook at Evangelicalish. That's evangelical with an ish. Now to Paul, Jeremy, and April on this episode of Evangelical-ish. I swore I wasn't going to screw it up this time. God darn it.
It was fine.
Welcome to Evangelicalish, those of you who are hanging with us live here on the live stream. And if you're listening in by podcast, we're glad to have you this week. And make sure you give us a like or a comment down below. And also, April, we are closing in on 1,000 members in the Evangelicalish private group on Facebook.
Ooh.
We're at 980. So I don't know. I have a goal to see us get to 1,000 there. So
I know. I feel like you're a numbers guy because I just feel like all pastors are numbers guys. Like 300 people, or like we need 20 guests. Everyone bring a guest, and that's going to be 100 people. If everyone bring, counting.
No, it's usually a thermometer, and like we're only $8,000 away from our goal.
I know, but only nice people, please. I feel weird about that group getting like too big, because then I feel like it'll lose its charm.
It was fun when we had 666 members.
I know. We've well surpassed that. Now we need to get to, I guess the next one would be 6,666, which that's a lot.
Which really doesn't mean anything. But
yeah, we can find 20 more friends, as Stephanie says in the
invite
chat.
your friends and get us 20 more on there. Yes, Jeremy was raptured this week, so he will not be
still raptured, waiting for the second coming, I guess, when he comes back.
When he'll be riding on a white horse with a pissed off Jesus ready to kill everybody.
Oh gosh. Yeah.
Which is happening
as told by evangelicals. Yeah, not real Jesus. Okay, do you have anything else to say before I just jump to our guest?
No, let's jump to our guest. And
okay, I am so excited because one, it's October. Last Friday was freaking October 13th. And I love enjoying spooky season. I think since being like out of the church, I can really enjoy it and just embrace it for all the fun that it is, that I couldn't really had to pretend I wasn't a fan of before, even though secretly I was like, that looks fun. So anyway, I wanted to do something kind of in line with Halloween. If your neighborhood is anything like mine, it is decorated in ghosts and witches and all sorts of supposedly spooky things. But witches are not just in fairy tales. They are real, and they're not these demonic possessed things that we should fear, like the church thought. So we have Hannah O'Neill joining us. She's also known as a suburban witch of Suburban Witchery online. And she also hosts a podcast called Witch Talks. And she is a witch. Aren't you, Hannah?
I am indeed. That is how I identify.
Are you going to eat my children?
Where's your hat?
No, I don't have a witch's hat. That's so bad. I have a really big head. I find it hard to find normal hats. So.
She's also from Australia, and she is Zooming with us live. It's in the morning there, right?
Mm-hmm. It is indeed.
And it's the evening here. So welcome across the country. That's the internet's so cool. I mean, I hate it sometimes, but this is the cool part of the internet.
It's so cool. I'm really blessed that we have the internet and we can keep in touch with people from all corners of the globe, even if I'm in a bit of a funky time zone, and it can make it difficult sometimes, but we can still make it work.
And you are, like me, a recovering Assemblies of God person.
Yes. I was born into an AOG church, so I have the indoctrinated from birth part of the religious trauma there.
And so we all know, with the horrific stuff happening in Israel right now, Jesus is going to be here any moment. Jesus is coming soon, morning or night or noon.
Yeah, I've been hearing that for a long time. Yeah, definitely. But Yes, so here I am. I'm a witch. I'm just going to start and preface this for anyone tuning in who may already feel some stuff coming up just at the word witch, right? I know that there are people who listen to this podcast at all different stages of the journey, and it can feel really intimidating, especially if you don't understand much about it. And it's this manufactured response we have to things like witchcraft, to things like anything spooky or that is seen as demonic. We just kind of close in on ourselves. And I was there too. I did the exact same reaction when I first met someone who introduced themselves as a witch. I was like, oh, no, like I can't, this is wrong, you know? And it took a long time for myself even. So I just want to acknowledge, if you're feeling that, that's okay. It's, you know, it's not a bad thing to feel that way. It's a manufactured response and it's valid. Okay, so make sure
I appreciate you sharing that, because I've definitely felt that way when I've met, like, the first person that introduced me to tarot was like, ah, isn't this like gonna open a portal to hell?
That was my thought exactly, because when I first wanted to do that, and it wasn't even me wanting it, it was, and this may sound weird, it was a voice that I sort of heard saying to get a tarot deck. And I know that most people in the church would be like, that's a demon obviously whispering in your ear, right? That's what it is. In my view now, and how I've sort of come through, and I'll probably get into the spiritual gifts and in comparison to what we use, I guess, in different words in the witchcraft community or the pagan community, New Age, alternative spirituality, there's a lot of the same stuff that was in the church, just with a different name. And so that voice that we hear, that's often the voice of God or the voice of what some people think is a demon, sometimes it's just our own intuitive voice, right? It's just the voice of us that we then demonize as well. Because I think the church sometimes tells you not to trust yourself. So that can be a bit tricky. That's learning to trust yourself again. So when I heard that first, sort of almost like a thought dropped in to buy a tarot deck, I was like, oh my gosh, I cannot do that. Absolutely not. And I pushed it down and I pushed it away. And I'd been out of the church for years at that point as well. And it still had this horror feeling coming over me when I thought of just a tarot deck, right? It's a packet of paper, if you think about it. And my husband, I remember telling him, and I said, I just feel like I need to buy a tarot deck. And he's like, okay, so buy a tarot deck. Now, he was raised Catholic, so a little bit different there. And I was like, oh, I cannot buy a tarot deck. How can you say that? The demon's going to pop out at me. And he's like, all right, so don't buy one. I'm like, but I feel like I have to.
I felt. You felt like God was telling you to get a tarot deck?
I can't explain to you. I still can't explain the draw that I had to it. But when I finally worked up the courage, it took about a year. Finally worked, and I went into stores and I would look at them and I wouldn't touch. And then, you know, one day I'd pick one up and be like, oh no, I can't. And when I finally worked up the courage, I thought, okay, you know, if something bad happens, I'll just take it back, whatever. I just feel like I have to do this. And I went and picked it up and I took it to the counter and I said, can I get this tarot deck, please? And she just went, yep, that'll be $30. And I was like, I'm sorry, do you not realize how big of a moment this is? Like, why are you not congratulating me? I didn't say that. I just sort of went, okay, see you later. And I took it home and I picked a deck that looked really ethereal, and it was all pastel colors and it didn't look too scary. And I think that was a big part of it. It didn't look like what I'd seen on the TV shows. And I think since then I've used it every single day of my life. I think it was incredibly helpful to finding who I was again after all of the conditioning that you go through in high control religion. So it was incredibly helpful to me. It's been incredibly helpful to friends and family and my clients as well, because I do read tarot professionally now. And it's fun. I have so much fun with it. I think that's an aspect. People think it's really like, ooh, spooky. And you could be if you want it to be, but I use it for really fun and creative purposes. I use it to do creative storytelling with my children. I use it to write books. I use it for all sorts of fun, kooky, creative things as well. So I think that's one of the aspects that we're probably going to touch on today is the way the church portrays it is not always the full picture as well.
If I had a tarot card reading done live on a podcast, and then we did it on this podcast for Jeremy And there is that thing inside of like, ooh, am I doing something bad? Is a demon going to jump on me? I'm, the Assemblies of God begat both Hillsong and the Bethel movement here in America. And at Bethel, we were taught to prophesy over one another. And I have to say that when I got that first tarot card reading, I'm like, this feels exactly like receiving a prophetic word at Bethel. There is no difference. And I even had a friend call me and say, I'm with you on everything on deconstruction, but I'm not going to go to the dark arts, And,
the dark arts.
But I couldn't tell the difference between receiving a prophetic word at Bethel or in my own church than a tarot reading.
I think I've actually had a more accurate reading from tarot than I've had lots of prophetic words, and most of them were hogwash. But we went to a wedding last March, and I thought this was so cool. But the bride and groom had a tarot reader there for all the guests. Like, they paid for her in advance, so she was just offering her services for all of the wedding guests there. But most of the people here were like conservative Christian, so no one was going to her. And I made eye contact with her across the way, and I was wanting to go over there, but I also was with my in-laws, and I was like, they already think I'm a black sheep. I'm like, they don't need to see me going to get my tarot read. But then the lady came over and like pulled me aside. She's like, hey, like, I'm doing tarot readings over here. I would love, like, you just seem like a safe person. If you'd like to come over, I'd love to give you a reading. And I was like, okay. So then I felt kind of like you mentioned about your pull to get tarot. Like, I felt a pull, like, okay, well, I have to go over there. Like, I don't care what other people think. Like, she's come over. So I go over there. And at that point, we were trying to decide whether we were going to move to Murfreesboro, Tennessee, or Lexington, Kentucky. We didn't have any job offers yet, but we were hoping to get a job offer from both. And I was team Murfreesboro because I really wanted to go to Nashville, and we thought for sure it was going to be Nashville or Murfreesboro. And she was just like, okay, you're going to get 2 offers. The Lexington offer is going to be better. You'll be happy in either place, but Lexington's going to be community, and you're going to be really happy there.
Had you told her Lexington was one of the options, or did she?
I had told her, had said Kentucky and Murfreesboro. So I didn't even say Lexington. So she might have just said Kentucky. But either way, everything came true. We got 2 offers. The Kentucky one was better, and I fought it so badly because I really wanted to move to Nashville. But here we are in Lexington. I was like, dang, everything she said was so true. And like, she just said things that she could not have known that, I guess you could say she, lucky guess, I guess, but it just felt like very inspired.
So Hannah, talk to us about that a little bit, because here's Jay. He says, I think he's talking about prophetic words and tarot cards, that it's all suggestion. Do you feel like there is mysticism and something supernatural in your tarot reading and how you operate as a witch?
Yes, I do feel there is something supernatural. However, I can also say that he's not wrong in a lot of aspects as well, because there is always an element of that in everything we do as people, right? Subconscious suggestion is absolutely a thing. We've proved that with psychology, right? We know that that is a thing. So I can't say that's not true, but I can say I feel in my experience there is something extra as well. Okay, so when I'm using the tarot cards for something like creating a story. So at the moment I'm gearing up. I don't know if there's any writers out there. I'm gearing up to do another dose of NaNoWriMo, which is National Novel Writing Month in November.
So you're saying you use tarot as AI now?
Kind of like
tarot is writing your...
Yeah, not writing it, but as a writing tool. So one of the things I suggest for people who are writing is, you can pull out the cards and pull one to represent the beginning, middle, and end of your story to get those creative cogs turning. And I liken creativity as the same energy as intuition, right? And this is just giving you a little jumping off point a lot of the time. So just like when you ask, where did that writer get that idea from? Where did that painter come up with that concept from? It's their creativity, but could it also be intuition? Could it also be coming from something else, right? So I would argue that we get a lot of stuff from somewhere else, but I've given readings where there is no way I could have known the things that I knew. And I knew that, like, for example, right, if you watch a medium doing their work, right, and they know these things about someone's past loved one, the immediate thought, especially when I was straight out of the church, was, oh, they've just looked them up online, right? Or if they know that, they've obviously looked them up previously. Now, when you go and do a mediumship reading yourself, when you're doing the actual reading like I was, and this was in my very first attempt at it when I did some mediumship development, I knew that I didn't look this person up because it's me, right? And it was on a Zoom call. It was this Zoom mediumship development circle. And I just joined one day randomly it was a Facebook group. And I was like, oh, I'll just see how it goes, right? I can do tarot. Maybe I can do this. And it was a group of like a bunch of people, and they didn't give us the how-tos. They didn't say this is what you do and how you connect. I didn't realize I'd joined a more advanced one, and it was just sort of thrown in the deep end. And so they say, this is the person we're reading. Just everyone turn your screens off, take a moment to connect in, and then come back and tell us what you got. And I was like, oh, okay. So I sat there and just sort of any images, which for me is clairvoyance, anything that came through image-wise or that I heard or felt, I just wrote it in a little book. I've still got the piece of paper now because it blew me away. And I thought, all right, when I tell the person what I got, I've never met them. They're on the other side of the world. I knew their name and that was it. I thought maybe I will just, cross out and circle the things that I got right or wrong and just build up from there. And everyone else gives a little reading first. Everyone else is sort of connecting, obviously, to the same person in this person's life that had passed away. And I was like, I got none of that. I'm obviously really bad at this. This is going to be so embarrassing. And when it finally got to me, because what I perceived was quite vivid as well, it was obviously an end of life scene. And I thought, oh, I'm just making this up. This is just my imagination gone wild, but that no one knows me. I can just log off if it's all really wrong, right? And so I said, all right, I saw this person. It looked like a man. He was, not too old, not like a grandparent or anything, quite youngish, like 30s, 40s, not old enough to be passing away, in my opinion. Very skinny, tall, and I could see the image of like a sun and a moon, like a sun with a moon in it, the crescent moon on his arm. And the person that I was talking to did one of those like, and I was like, oh, do you want me to keep going? And they were like, mm-hmm. And I was like, okay. It felt like not like a brother, but maybe like a cousin or something, just sort of slightly out of your inner circle. And what I saw, and I'm really sorry to say this is what I saw, and I don't want to offend anyone, but I saw like blood bubbling up out of their chest and them coughing it up. And she started crying, and I was like, oh my God, I've just traumatized this person. I'm so sorry. And she said, I have never had someone connect with him. He passed last year. And she said it was her cousin, and he was an addict, and they couldn't get him they kept trying, they kept putting him in rehab, and he just kept leaving. And then one day he walked into her house and started coughing up blood, and he drowned in his own blood. And I was like, I don't know how I knew that. And that was for me. And I remember my husband was in, the back room, just sort of overhearing the whole thing. And for him, who he claims he's an atheist, and he sort of turned around, he's like, that was wild. So those sorts of validations that you can get tells me that it is more than just suggestion. That in that case, that's not me suggesting someone takes an action and them going, oh, I did it. Oh, it came true. This is something different. So that, and it took me so long to get to that mediumship aspect, right? That was totally fear-inducing. There were so many baby steps that I had to go through there, and telling myself that, it's okay. It's the fires of hell are not going to rain down. A portal to hell is not going to open up and swallow me. There was all those things that really, really greatly affected me and my actions in life that I had to work through, similar to how I worked through other traumas in my life. I've used therapy and those sorts of things to move through them. But yeah, so in terms of that, whether it's suggestion, there's always going to be an element of that in some future-based readings. But I do think there is definitely something more at play, in my opinion and in my belief.
That is amazing. So, okay, give us the brief of how did you go from being Assemblies of God, Pentecostal girly girl? I don't know, not that you're a girly girl, but evangelical, girly pop, whatever they say, to which it sounds like it was a journey. It wasn't overnight. So, like, was there a moment that made you interested in witchcraft?
So I'll give a little bit of a backstory. So as I said, we were Assemblies of God Church. We were quite a large. I would count it as a mega church. I don't know if there's a specific amount of people, but the church I went to held about 1,000 people and had multiple services per day. It's quite
That's
a big
pretty
church.
good. Yeah.
So when I was a child, I think I was about 5 years old when I went up to the altar to give my heart to Jesus. Obviously, everyone was very, very happy at this development because they wanted it to be my choice. And I was praying there, and I remember praying that the Holy Spirit would, work their way through me and would come to me and all of this. And the pastor comes along, pushes on your head, fall down to be slain in the Spirit. And I remember even at the age of 5 going, am I supposed to fall like involuntarily? Obviously, I didn't have that word, but do I make it happen or does something else make it happen? It was already a question at that point. And when he pushed, I just sort of went, oh, well, everyone else is doing it, so I'll just go down and lie on the ground and keep praying. And I did, and I was praying, and as I did, this almost like this little image opened up in front of me. And I knew that I wasn't dreaming because I could hear the band still playing. I could hear the pastor praying over everyone. I could sense my surroundings, but I could see something else in front of me. And I saw these, beautiful brown-skinned children looking up at me. And I was obviously not a child in this vision, but I could see my hands in front of me and I could see this dirt floor that we were all standing on. And then it was like I came back to myself and I was like, oh, I've had a vision from God, because that was the framework I was working within. I told the pastor, we went over to my mom, we told my mom, and they're like, oh, prophetic vision. You've seen a vision from God. And I was like, obviously I'm going to be a missionary. That's the only rational thing that I can come up with, right? Because that's what I see when we do our, call to missions and we raise our funds. That's what I see on the TV screen, the big drop down screen. That's what I'm going to be. So I was determined to be a missionary and I gave it my all. Like I was in, because I get a lot of comments from people. And the big one from many, many Christians is, oh, you were never really Christian.
No,
If
they
you
love
got
that
away,
one.
you were never really Christian. And I was like,
yeah.
I feel so sad for you, because if that's your belief, then how can you ever change your mind when presented with any other evidence? You're trapped by that belief,
Yeah.
right? So I feel a lot of compassion for people when they say that. There's also a lot of eye rolling because it's like, well, come up with something new. However, I was very, very entrenched in that. And there was a few other times where I saw other things as well. So then when I was in my teens, early teens, there was a few things that happened that started me to think something wasn't quite right. The first one was that I developed a pretty severe eating disorder. And then obviously along with that is depression, anxiety, and there was some self-harm as well. Now, for me, looking at that, and I felt so out of control with it. And I'm like, obviously I'm possessed. There's a demon here, right here. This is the only explanation that I have for this. Why else? So I upped the praying. I was at church 4 times a week. So I'd go to the Sunday morning session. I'd go to the Sunday night session. I'd go to my prayer group on a Wednesday, and I'd go to youth group on a Friday. And I remember looking back as an adult now, I can remember the way the preachers would almost pray, and I mean that in the P-R-E-Y, pray on the vulnerabilities that I was feeling. Because the sermons went, no matter how broken you are, no matter how far you've fallen, Jesus is here waiting for you. And I thought, and I would be crying every week. And, we'd have church camp and we'd have cry night where everyone's on the floor crying, like, what a traumatic event. And at the time, I just thought it was beautiful, right? Oh, we're all so close to God. Now I'm like, oh my gosh, the music and the way they spoke and everything really dictated that response. You want to talk about suggestion? That is a suggestive rife environment, especially
and grooming.
For a young age. And grooming, yes. So I'm obviously going through a really hard time. When my parents discovered what was happening, they got actual help. So thankfully, I have a mum with a head on her shoulders, and she got me a therapist and all of that and took me through to the hospital. And at the same time, we also got involved with the youth pastor's girlfriend, who was apparently supposed to counsel me.
Of course.
Oh.
Yeah. Now, she was in her early 20s, had no counseling experience.
Of course.
There was no confidentiality agreement. There was nothing official, right? But of course, she was taking notes. Those notes were kept at the church. She was then passing everything I said on to her to my parents. So it was this real breach of trust. And now I look back and this real breach of ethics as well. And so these sorts of things, and it wasn't helping. That was the problem. None of it was helping, no matter how much I prayed, no matter how much someone else prayed. All I felt was dirty and wrong and guilty and full of shame, and what a terrible person I am that I'm doing this, right? So that was kind of where things were starting to unravel. Now, when yay for smart mums, says Stephanie in the comments. Yes, absolutely. My mum is on ball, right? Now, my mum was also in the women's ministry. So we were in the church, okay? We were only allowed friends that were in the church. Like, it was like that. My school was a Christian school as well. Now, my mum went to Bible college. And thankfully for her, because I would ask 1,000,001 questions. I'm also neurodivergent, and I look back at some of those mental health things as undiagnosed neurodivergence in my teens. But I would ask 1,000,001 questions and get, doubt your doubts, not your faith. Pray on it. And I was like, but it doesn't make sense. Make it make sense. And so I'd ask my mum, and she would actually give me that, well, in Bible college, they taught us this. And, this is what I think as well. So a lot of them were based around ethics and fairness and morals. So things like, well, if you have to give your heart to Jesus in order to get to heaven, what about the millions of people who have never heard of Jesus? What about them? That's not fair. And she said, well, the church would say that's why we go and do our missionary work and we evangelize. And I'm like, but still, what about the ones we don't get to? Like, that's
right.
Yeah.
That's not fair for them. Those poor kids.
I've also asked those questions.
How about the ones who weren't born into an Assemblies of God family in a Western Euro culture?
Exactly. And then my mum said, look, that's what the church would have you believe. And she said, but I believe if you haven't heard the word of God, you will see him everywhere. You will see him in nature. You will see him in every cell within our body will sing with him. And I thought, oh, now that feels good. I like that answer. That makes sense to me, that we see him in nature, right? And I guess that was part of the stepping away from church's thinking to having a more, belief that fit with me and my values and my ethics. And
isn't that funny that Christians think God can make all these loopholes for like babies that die, but not if you've heard the gospel. So to me, the kind thing would be to not
don't tell anyone. Yeah.
People, so God,
That's a really good point.
Keep it to yourself. Yeah.
Or I always said, like, why don't we just kill people once they become a Christian so they don't have a chance to sin again?
They don't have a chance to stuff it up. Yeah.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I feel like there would be people that anyway.
Yeah, some people might like that idea a little too much.
Yeah. So
Christianity would shrink quite a bit at that point, though, for sure.
Get what you're saying. So along this whole route, I remember back in the days of video shops when you'd go and pick a video to watch on the weekend, right? I was always drawn to looking at all the spooky and horror ones. I remember I'd go and, like, when mum was at the other end of the video shop, I'd go and look at, there was one, it was like, I don't know, Werewolf in Paris or something silly like that. And I'd quickly read the back and be like, oh, and put it back and hide it behind something. And I was always drawn to like these really things that I wasn't supposed to look at, right? It was all done in shame and secret. And this is, my mom said I was a very weird kid. So probably from a very young age. And I just learned to hide it and not let anyone know. And when I got access to the internet as a young child, oh my goodness, the amount of rabbit holes I went down on. I found at the age of 12, I found the actual recordings, and I do not recommend anyone goes and looks this up. You know the story, the Exorcism of Emily Rose that they made into a movie?
Yep.
It was based on a real, I think, German girl named Anneliese. And I found the actual recordings on some dark web space place of that exorcism. That terrified the pants off me, and I was certain there were demons under my bed for years after that because of what I'd done. Anyways, and all of that was just like feeding into that fear. So we're deep in the church. I'm feeling all this shame. Nothing's helping. I'm in just sort of like this crazy mental health spiral as a teen. And then my parents divorce. Now, that was unheard of. I didn't know anyone who had parents who were divorced. What are you talking about? That's not allowed. And it was very messy. And as soon as they did end up splitting, I was given a choice. Do you want to live with your mom or your dad? And I was 15. I was like, my mom, because, I'm a girl and my dad will not talk about. You can imagine asking a dad for pads and tampons? Like, no. Christian dad, very stoic, like absolutely not. So I chose to live with my mom.
You even lowered your voice right there. Pads and tampons.
Yeah, no.
Like we still can't say it out loud.
Oh, so I chose to live with my mum. Now, that was the wrong choice, apparently, because, we went to church and the head pastor, who was our family friends from when I was a child, like we had play dates with them all growing up, went to the same school, all of that. The head pastor turned around and said, "Oh, you don't think you can come back here, do you?"
Ooh.
Oh my gosh.
We were like, okay.
Wow.
All right. And I guess we're not welcome here. So
I don't believe in hell anymore, but I hope that guy goes there.
This is actually his wife, pastor's wife, I should say.
Oh, okay. I hope she goes there. Yeah.
So that was a big slap on the face. And then all of our family friends, all of my friends at school, don't talk to Hannah. Can't. They're living in sin. You cannot talk to Hannah. And
just because of the divorce?
Because of the divorce.
Oh my gosh.
And
I'm getting angry for you. I'm sorry.
Yeah. So yeah, the response we had was anger. Absolutely. But we still believed in God. We still were Christian, right? So how do you start to reconcile these things together? My dad was still allowed at the church. My brother was still welcome.
Wow.
So I'm starting to go like, that's not fair. How is that fair, right? And so that break from just suddenly losing my entire community, right? I was going 4 times a week. There was everyone at school. I ended up having to change schools because the way the girls acted, which was very catty, was just so incredibly stressful on top of everything else I was already going through. So changing schools, no more church, all of our friends gone, family friends, everyone. And even my family, the family that we had left was the Christian side on my dad's side and was kind of sticking with my dad. So I felt completely cut off from everybody. Not a great place to be. And what I did at that point was I actually did start experimenting. I was like, well, what's the point? What is the point if I'm kicked out like that? Why not watch, I don't know, some scary movie with a vampire in it? Why not read that Stephen King book that I really wanted to read and has never been allowed? And so I started exploring, and so did my mum. And I think I should note here, one thing I think they were really quick to turn on my mum. They'd been waiting for a while. She's an image consultant. So she does style consultations and things like that. And she was doing that in the church, and she started taking on clients who were transgender, which they were like, you can't do that. And she's like, why not? I'm helping. Like, she was really so accepting, and she taught me from a very young age that if someone is suicidal in the way that they look and they dress, and I can help them not be suicidal, why would I not help? This feels like the right thing to do. So she had some amazing morals and ethics that she passed on, but she was, they did not like her doing that. So I think they were looking for the first possible reason to get her out of the church. So that's kind of that story of how we got out of it. But it still took a long time to unravel everything else. And then to get where I am now, that was a huge leap.
Yeah.
So a bit of that began with travel. I was traveling the world. I traveled by myself. I was very adventurous. And I was with one of my colleagues at the time in Singapore. She met up with me there. I'd gone to Europe, came back. She's like, I'll meet you up in Singapore. That's where I grew up. So this colleague of mine is in her 60s. She's a grandmother. She's Hindu, and just the most different person that I could have been as a 18-year-old girl. And I was like, yeah, sweet. We got along like a house on fire. So when we were wandering through Singapore, when she would see a Hindu temple, she'd say, I have to go in. And I was like, oh, can I come? Can I have a look? And she was like, yeah, come on in. I'll tell you where you can go to. You can't go all the way in. I was like, that's fine. So you take your shoes off, you go on in. And I was like, wow, this is so colorful. Wow. Like there's my mega church felt very stale and professional and polished, whereas this felt creative and alive. Like there was more colors than I knew what to do with. Everything was hand painted. I was like, wow, this would have taken so much time and dedication rather than my own church, which was, wow, would have taken a lot of money, right? It was different view. And I was like, this is interesting. I don't feel wrong for being in here either. This is really cool. And I want you to remember as well, this whole time, I still think I was given this vision from God, and what was all the point in that? And maybe I'm going to find a church one day. So I still hadn't come out of that mindset. Anyway, she said, this is where you can go up to. I'm going to go in and do what I got to do. And I was like, all right. So I stayed there for a bit, got a bit bored, wandered out. And outside, there's this woman sitting on the ground, and she had some cards there. And she kind of beckoned. She's like, come sit. And I was like, oh, I don't want to be rude culturally or anything. Okay. So I sat down, and she grabs my hand and starts reading my palm. And I was like, oh, oh no. And she starts telling me some things, things like, oh, you're going to live to this age. And I was like, yeah, whatever. And then she starts saying, oh, you have a boyfriend. And I was like, yes, go on. And then as I've gone, oh, that resonates or whatever, I hear this in the back of my mind, a demon's whispering to her. And I was like, but I can't take my hand away. That would be really rude. Like, I don't know what to do in this situation. So I just was like, yes, I have a boyfriend. And she was like, he is not the one. This is not the person for you. And I was like, that is so rude. And I really thought that person was my person. That was not my person. Side note, listener, that was not my person. So she's reading, she said a few other things, and I was like, how does she know this about me? Oh my goodness. Then she turns around, pulls a parrot out of a cage, and the parrot picked a card for me. And I was like, what just happened? That's now illegal. They don't do that in Singapore anymore, but back then they did. So they pulled out this card, and she read this card. Again, it was wild what she said. And I just kind of walked away from that going, surely that has to be demons, right? That's wow. But it felt really true. And then nothing bad happened. Nothing bad happened. I think that was a huge eye-opening moment for me, because I presumed that by simply sitting down and allowing her to do a palm reading and a card reading, and also the fact that I stepped into a Hindu temple, obviously I was going to be smote. Like something bad was going to be happening to me, and nothing did. Yep. So I kind of, I don't know, walked away from that feeling really intrigued and really curious. Like, okay, well, what if I've discounted this whole thing for no reason? And that's when I started researching. So I went back and read the Bible again. This was probably my third read through from front to back. And whilst a lot of that still felt true to me, because it wasn't that long since I'd been out of the church, it had only been a couple of years, there were some things that I started reading and went, oh, that's weird. I never noticed that before. Oh, that's gross. Why is that in there? Oh, I don't like that. And I'd never read it critically before. So that was a huge eye-opening thing for me. So then it sort of went through like that, just sort of experimenting here and there. And then I was traveling again, and I was in Louisiana at that point, which is a beautiful place. I love Louisiana. I was always drawn to Louisiana. And I actually had some supernatural things happen that I couldn't explain, other than there's a ghost haunting or something like that. Seeing someone sit down on the edge of the bed, and I could see the indent and feel them sit, but I couldn't see anybody, was very spooky, and I didn't know what to do. So I went straight back into the church, in terms of I put on my Hillsong music. I had the lights on. I was praying, and it didn't work. And I was like, very serious. This is the most serious I have prayed ever, and it didn't work. And at the time I was doing something called woofing. I don't know if anyone's heard of that. It's willing workers on organic farms. So it's a way of working in places like the US or around the world in exchange for food and board. And it meant I got to live with a beautiful local family with them for a few months and learn so much about what they were doing there. It was a goat dairy farm. It was really fun. And they had a young girl, a granddaughter, that lived with them. And so I went out one day and I said, I don't really know how to say this without you laughing at me, but has anyone ever mentioned, I was living in her trailer, the trailer at the back. I said, anyone ever mentioned something about the trailer? Like, has anyone ever said anything about stuff happening in there? And she just turned around. She's like, oh, what did you bring back from New Orleans with you? And I was like, you're not laughing at me? She's like, this is Louisiana. Civil War battlegrounds everywhere. Everyone's house is haunted. Like, it's normal. And I was like, I thought you guys were a good Christian family. Like, what is going on here? And she said, don't worry, I've got a friend. He's a witch. He'll come and help you out. And I was like, what? A witch? He thinks he's a witch? That was my response, right? So I understand anyone who has that response as well, because my first response was kind of laughter, like, that's made up. That's a fairy tale. And she goes, yeah, he is. He's a really good one too. And then second response was, he's a boy witch. Is that what it's called? And for anyone listening, witch is a gender neutral term. So that is...
So it's not wizards and witches.
Correct. Anyone can call themselves a witch. Some people choose other words and they resonate with other words, but the word witch technically just means wise. And the way I use it now is that I take my own beliefs and my own opinions from my own learnings and experiences rather than what someone else, like the church, tells me. So that's my definition, right? It's my own wisdom that I have within myself based on my own experiences.
And you do not worship Satan.
Correct. Christians worship Satan more than me. There's nothing to do with my practice with Satan, right? I know they would look at it differently and be like, oh, Satan takes many forms. I get that aspect.
Satan comes as an angel of light.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. So in that case, I would be saying, look at the leaders of the church, but that's...
Yep.
So, yeah, so that's kind of my first introduction. He did come in and he did what's called divination, which is a way of finding something out that you couldn't already know. So tarot is a form of divination. Palm reading is a form of divination. So tarot is cartomancy, so it's divination through cards. And he did something which is called dactyliomancy, or using a pendulum. And we do that all the time at things like baby showers, when you have the ring and you put it over the baby's stomach to do a gender prediction. That's divination, right? We do it in the church when we flip open the Bible to get some guidance from God. That's called bibliomancy.
Oh, the little point your finger trick. Like, what do you got for me today, God? Flip the pages, random verse.
Yep.
Exactly. That is bibliomancy. That's divination using a book. So there were things when I'm seeing this and starting to learn, I'm like, oh, we did that in the church. Oh, other people do that. Oh, you can do that without the church aspect. That's interesting, right?
And by the way, if I can interject, wouldn't a man bleeding on a cross in execution 2,000 years ago buying eternal salvation be some version of divination? Isn't that a mystical, supernatural process?
It could be seen as that, absolutely.
So we believe in this stuff in Christianity, but just our own, you know.
It's also blood sacrifice, which is what people associate with witches.
Yeah.
That's literally what Christianity is based on. It's okay when they do it, though. I guess I'm still a Christian. Also manifestation and like name it and claim it. Is the same.
There's that speak it into existence and God will make it happen. Speak it in faith. But we also have that in New Age spirituality, which would be law of attraction. That is the same coin on different sides, right? That is
everybody says today, like, manifest that. That's big in our world today.
Yeah. So when this witch came and he basically said, oh yeah, something has followed you back from New Orleans. Did you go to a cemetery? And I was like, I did a cemetery tour. They were beautiful cemeteries. And he's like, yep. You probably need some etiquette in terms of how you interact in those spaces. I'll sort it out for you. And then he did what he called a cleansing. So he cleansed the space and nothing happened since. Everything was good. And I was like, it worked. The thing, whatever he did, it worked. So that was a bit of an eye-opener for me. So then it still took a few years after that, but it was kind of these little introductions.
At that point, were you thinking ghosts, like this was definitely a ghost, or were you still thinking that was just the demon pretending to be a ghost?
I don't know if I knew. I just knew it was supernatural, whether it was a demon or a ghost. There was something there that didn't feel good. And I could sense that it wasn't
Friendly.
a good feeling. Yeah, it felt heavy and not nice, right? So now I can see, looking back, that a lot of my experiences, I'm very sensitive to those sort of shifts and changes in energy and how things feel. So it didn't feel good. And then afterwards, when this witch came in and cleansed that space and protected it, it felt fine. So I was like, interesting. So again, that sort of informed some of that practice. And then when I finally got into things like divination, I started with tea leaf reading because that felt safer. It was kind of more fun, a little bit more lighthearted. And it allowed me to sort of test the waters in a way that didn't feel too scary. And I had people at my workplace at the time that would say things, you know, like, oh, I'm just feeling a bit, I don't know what it is. Maybe I'm coming down with something. And I was like, oh, I got a tea for that. And I'd go to my cupboard and I'd come back with, you know, a licorice tea. And I was like, I feel like you're getting a sore throat. Licorice tea is going to work with that. And they're like, how do you know? I was like, I don't know. I don't know. I like herbal tea. I have lots in my cupboard. That just felt like the right one. And everyone started saying, oh, you're a little bit witchy, aren't you? And I was like, oh, I am a little bit witchy. But if they had said, if anyone had said, are you a witch? I would have gone like, whoa, no, I'm not a witch, right? That's wrong. But a little bit witchy with a Y felt a little bit safer. So that's kind of where it sort of started coming together. And then it was just a little bit of trial and error and trying a few different things and seeing how things felt to me. And when I'm trying to describe things, like everyone's like, oh, do you do spells? I'm like, well, yeah, but it's kind of just like spicy prayers. It's you're praying for something, but you're also using correspondences, which are things that align with the intent of your prayer, right? And adding them in, which in my view just makes it clearer in your mind and is kind of a way of manifestation as well, or a kind of way of just calling in.
Is that an incantation? I'm sorry, April.
Oh, no, go ahead.
Is it an incantation? Do you use, you know?
Some people can do, some people don't. There's a few different things and people get really scared by it. But I mean, the very first spell that I did, right? The first thing where I was like, okay, I actually want to do something, was I wrote someone's name on a piece of paper, folded it and threw it in my freezer because they were really bothering me and they stopped bothering me. And that's called a freezer spell. And it just sort of calms them down, chills them out. And I was like, ooh, is that coincidence? Maybe. If it is, cool. Whatever, I'll take it because they have stopped bothering me. So, and then I look at people that are scared of that. I'm like, it's a piece of paper. Like, feel free to laugh at it. It feels really innocent in a way, right? It's just kind of showing the universe like, hey, this person needs to chill out. And then it kind of happens. Whether that's my belief making it happen, I don't know. It worked. And so I continued.
What about wands? Do you use wands?
I don't. Some people do. Again, I can't speak for all witches out there, and there are so many different.
But there are in witchcraft, like modern witchcraft, there are wands that some use.
Yes, it would be seen as a tool to, like a ritual tool that would be an extension of yourself or an extension of your energy, right? So they might use it to ritually cast a circle, which is like a protective circle, open a circle or close a circle. That's one way that people might do that. There's many different tools. A lot of the time it's symbolic and to symbolize something, similar to how the church also has rituals and symbols that they use as well.
And it's not, you don't wiggle your nose and make things appear. And I don't mean to ask that facetiously.
Like magic. Like what?
Is there true magic in it? Yeah.
I think there is true magic in it, in my opinion, and what I've seen happen. But again, it's not something like, oh, I made something appear. It's not a magician's trick. And you'll often see people use the word magic with a K on the end. And that is specifically to separate it from magicians' illusions. Like, it's not to be seen as we're making illusions and trickery and cunning and all of that. It's different, right? And it's, for me, my practice, if you will, is very nature-based with things like cycles, right? So the new and the full moon and living in cycle with them. So when we have a dark moon, which is just before a new moon, there's no moon in the sky, I try and make sure I've got time out of my day to rest more, to slow down. And then as that new moon grows up to the full moon, I'm speeding up and I'm doing more things. Full moon, maybe I'll do something really big or exciting. And then things slow down again as we get back to the new moon. So I'm living in cycles with nature. And the church uses the moons as well. Not that many people realize, like when we celebrate Easter is based on the moon. When we celebrate Christmas, that is also based on the solstice, right? So I'm also utilizing things like the solstice or the equinox and just bringing them in energetically into my practice to align myself with the rhythms of nature. And I don't feel like that's a bad thing. I think that's something humans have done for most of history. And the reason a lot of it's gone away is because we have things like electricity, right? And we can't see what the moon's doing. We can't tell when we're at the equinox and the day and night is equal. So it's kind of just this stepping back into more natural rhythms and observing that and observing how it makes me feel and reacting accordingly.
And the Magi were astrologers, by the way, as well. So.
Yes. I say that all the time. What do you think the three wise men were? right? They were astrologers. And there is a really great podcast. It's called I think it's just the Astrology Podcast or Astrology Hour Podcast, with Chris Brennan. He's an astrologer, and he did a whole episode on, were the wise men astrologers, and what was the star that they were following? Do we know? Was it Venus? Was it Venus? Where was it? Can we pinpoint it? So there's a whole episode on that. He's a very, very gifted astrologist. He's fantastic. So yes, it's fascinating when you start to, I guess, look at the different things. And to that, the spiritual stuff we were talking about earlier, spiritual gifts, which I forgot to put in my story. When I was traveling, because as I said, I traveled around the world. At the age of 21, I traveled with a different boyfriend to Cambodia. We went on this beautiful, we're going on this romantic holiday, which as soon as we got there, I realized, you know what, this is not working. See you later. And I actually sent him home to Australia. I was like, I'm not traveling with you anymore. You can go. Wasn't what I was expecting. So sent him home, and I was there by myself. And I thought, what am I going to do? And so one of the local boys in Cambodia, I paid him for the day. I said, just take me to all your favorite places and just show me around. What do you do on a normal day? And his name was Poe. And Poe said, usually I go, if I have some extra money, I get some rice and I take it to this orphanage. And I said, cool, let's do that. Let's get 2 bags of rice, take it to this orphanage. So he took me to the orphanage, and when I got there, they said, do you want to have a look around? So they gave me this tour, showed me what they were doing. And they said, and this is our English room where we teach English. Would you like to come in and say hi to the children? And I walked in, and I turned around, and there were these beautiful brown-skinned children looking up at me on dirt floor. And I had this moment of like, oh my, I still get shivers when I say it. Like,
Wow.
it's like, this is my vision. I was 5 when I had it. I couldn't say that because no one there would have understood anything I was talking about. But it was this real mind-blowing moment of, oh my goodness, I misinterpreted it. It was just a vision of the future. It wasn't that I was meant to be a missionary. And I did take that as a sign. I ended up going back there and volunteering with them for a couple of months, which was really amazing. But those spiritual gifts that we talk about in the church, those gifts of prophecy, a lot of the time, and gifts of things like dreams and dream divination, which is like Joseph in the Code of Dreams. He was using a neuromancy, which is divination through dreams. All of those things we have also outside of the church. So that's one thing. If people have had that in the church, it can be really hard to leave that behind because that feels so real, not realizing that it's also real outside of the church. The voice of God that a lot of people are hearing, sometimes it's their own intuition. Other people might argue it is a higher self or something else coming on, or clairaudience, which is when you can hear, your psychic sense of clear hearing. There's clairsentience, that's feeling. A lot of people that show a lot of empathy might consider themselves an empath, are really clairsentient. They can feel what other people are feeling around them. Some people say it's the gift of hospitality, right? That a lot of women would get, funnily enough.
Yes.
So how would you, how do you feel about God now? Like, do you believe in a higher power, like a singular higher power, or just like, how do you view spirituality and God?
Great question. So for myself, I do believe, and not all witches agree on this, there are witches out there that are atheist, all sorts of things, secular witches. I believe there is, whether you want to use the term God or goddess or universe or source energy. Source energy feels right for me, the source of energy, the source of where everything came from. I do believe that would be termed as a creator. However, the God of the Bible is not who I see that as, if that makes sense. Like, there's a distinction. A book that was really, really helpful to me was something called the Kybalion, and it's about Hermetic philosophy. It's an older book. There are some things that don't quite track now, reading back on older books, that's the same with many of them, and how the Bible should also be read. There's things that don't quite track after some time. But the general idea was that there is source energy, and we are all parts of that source energy experiencing itself in a myriad of different ways and combinations in a way for it to better understand itself. And everything is just us going back to source energy and then trying again. I do believe in reincarnation. There is a lot of evidence for that. Ian Stevenson was a wonderful, wonderful scientist who did a lot of papers and studies on the matter of reincarnation and past lives. Really phenomenal to read through. And if anyone, because that's one thing as well, the afterlife situation, you leave the church, maybe you've deconstructed the Christianity situation, and you're like, oh my God, what actually happens afterwards? Where do we go? And it can be a real moment of fear, definitely. What if I'm wrong, right? What if I'm wrong? But what I found really helpful was things like reading these papers and these research papers. Another book, there's one called Many Lives, Many Masters by Brian L. Weiss. I highly recommend that for anyone questioning. It's written by he's a psychiatrist, and that's really, really well done.
So I
was shocked to find out that there's a type of reincarnation in Judaism as well, that if you don't live life well, you go back in line for the souls and come through. So that was interesting. I wanted to ask, I know you were about to say something there, April, but we see witchcraft in the Bible. We have the witch of Endor. Like she literally, I used to ask my dad about this. Like she calls up Samuel after he's dead, and we're told this.
She's a medium.
Yes, and the disciples cast lots to pick the next disciple and all of that. But what do you Exodus 22, don't suffer a sorceress to live, is one of those that people refer to a lot. I mean, I guess April asked how you view God. How do you view the Bible now? And considering there are texts that some Christians say mean you shouldn't live, or at very least you're evil.
Yeah, so there's two answers to that. The first part, as I said, my mom went to Bible college, and one of the really interesting things that she came out with was a lot of people who go into Bible college come out not Christian. And she said, because they teach you how the Bible was written. They teach you how to read it in context. They, if you come out Christian, it's a lot of it's faith and understanding that there are mistranslations and this is written by man and there are things in there that are incorrect. So whilst we were in the AOG, which is, we were non-denominational, but also Pentecostal, but also evangelical. It was very confusing. And she said, we're supposed to believe it's literal. To say it's not is not quite right in our church. And she goes, but I don't believe it is. So that kind of gave me a little bit of an opening to be like, okay, cool. That makes more sense because I couldn't get my head around the whole Adam and Eve and how they populated the earth from two people. That doesn't make sense. So thank you, Mum. With science, it doesn't quite make sense. But when I'm looking through it, what I like to do is look at the particular passages. Now, I know that witchcraft in the Bible came from, in the Greek text, it was the word pharmakeia. And the word pharmakeia actually is where we get the word pharmacy from. And in the time, right, in the context of the culture at the time that it was written, when they were saying pharmakeia, what they were actually talking about was not herbalists in the way that we think of them today, people who worked with the herbs as in poisoners, because a poisoner could poison the king or those in charge. And that was a big issue, right? We don't want our head of church or our king to be poisoned. So therefore, we cannot suffer them to live, right? This was a part of it. There's another one on there about mutterings. So they were talking about mutterings. I can't remember the full thing, but I have looked into it personally to be like, why is this? And there's a lot of different people with perspectives on what the mutterings could be. But again, it's open to interpretation, right? So I look at that pharmakeia as a mistranslation and people have just got it really wrong. And if they're really upset about it, maybe they should take it up with their local pharmacist rather than someone who's a witch on the internet, So, and in that, and you guys have probably covered it as well, things like homosexuality in the Bible wasn't added until the 40s, right? And then they just took off with it. Understanding that the whole rapture ideology didn't come around until the late 1800s. Before that, it was never a thing. So in my church, that was just taught as that is what it is. No one talked about where it came from, how it got in there, or why it was added. We never talked about how we all used the King James Bible, but that was heavily modified to suit King James and his political stance, right? So getting that knowledge, and knowledge is power, in my opinion, right? And there's a reason there was don't ask questions, doubt your doubts, not your fears, doubt your doubts, not your faith, because they don't want you to deconstruct by knowing more in a way. So that's my view on the Bible there. So I don't think it's literal. I did have a really great conversation. If anyone does want to get into that, there's a man named Justin Best. He is amazing. He was a Torah observant minister for a very long time, and he set out to prove that Jesus was real and that Paul was real, and he was very determined and unfortunately proved himself wrong. and began an accidental deconstruction. And I chatted with him on my podcast, and we did talk about a lot of the biblical aspect of things as well, which was really fascinating.
That sounds like a great conversation. I want to know, as we're wrapping up, because it's late where I am. Well, one, I want to know what has been maybe the most surprising thing about witchcraft, that maybe if like you were to go back to your evangelical self and say, like, if you could, I don't know, like what surprised you the most based on what you were taught about witchcraft and what you've learned. And I think, like, for me, I have friends who are Christian witches, and the idea that you could be a Christian witch. And I was talking to my friend who calls herself a Christian witch, and she was just saying how she uses Jesus as her spirit guide. And like, since Jesus is all she's known, because she was strongly evangelical, and like Jesus is just the name for the spiritual force that's always been in her life. Like, that's still the name she uses, so she feels connection to that name. And I just thought that was like, that just makes sense to me, but also like so different than anything I had ever been taught. So what would you say would be, like, I don't know, one or two like most surprising things?
I think one surprising thing is how much of a better person I am, not a Christian, and living in this way. I have a quote that I wanted to read out. This is from one of my friends, Yvonne Abro, who wrote a book called Changing Paths, and it is about changing religion. And it's not specifically from Christianity to paganism, although that was their path, but it is, any way of changing paths, how you would sort of start to figure out what's right for you. And they have something that really sums up what I wish I would have known back then. So if religion or spirituality makes us more disconnected from other people, less compassionate, less rational, then it is harmful. If, on the other hand, it enables us to feel more love and compassion for others and be better able to cope with the sorrowful aspects of life, then it is helpful. And that is how I feel now, calling myself a witch and feeling really empowered by that. Like, hell yeah, I'm a witch. Absolutely. I get to choose. I get to have a say in what I do and how I act. And now I don't feel like if I act and do something that I can perceive as good, I'm not doing it to win brownie points. I'm not doing it to be seen as good in the eyes of the church. I'm doing it because it's good and it's the right thing to do. I feel like my moral compass is more aligned, and I can be more loving and accepting of people and different ideas. And it's just made me feel happier. I no longer struggle with a lot of the mental health issues that I had younger, because I don't carry that shame and that guilt that was so prevalent early on. That constant high control of your thoughts and that high control of your behaviors, that's really detrimental to a lot of people, or to most people, I would argue. So the freedom is really freeing, and it's made me happier and a better person.
And if I can echo affirmation for that, if people are thinking, can I partake in some of this? And all of us have said, yes, we understand that it's a little bit scary, but I had an experience in a spiritual healing one day where a woman said, "Oh, there's a spirit of lust in your family line. We need to find that." And I saw a picture in my inner person of a woman in a red dress, and okay, that's it. That's the spirit. We need to renounce that. And we went through all of that. And then just a few months ago, an Indigenous friend of mine says, you need to connect with your ancestors, which I would have scoffed at, of course. And so I said, okay. And I went through this exercise, and this woman in the red dress popped up again. And I am convinced now that whether that's a spirit or an actual person, what the sense is that was a free spirit in our family line. And she was hated by the religious spirit in our family line, and thus was mistreated and such. And part of kind of my rituals now is like inviting that spirit to be free in our family again, and to be available. And I don't see anything opposed to Christ or the story of Jesus in that process at all. And it's very comforting.
I would also say that they're probably on your mother's side. I'm not sure if you've looked into your family tree, just based on the red aspect in what I do. There's something called the red thread, which is through your mother line and the mother lineage. So could be interesting to see if you can figure out who that is. I feel more connected with my ancestors through my practice. I have an area where I light a candle in remembrance of them. I think most people do that. I call it an ancestor altar. Other people would probably just say, I have a candle of grandma, and we light a candle, a photo of grandma, we light a candle on her birthday, right? Same idea.
Yeah. And I would say, my mother-in-law passed away a while back. My wife had a really hard relationship with her mom. And because how this deconstruction has opened up our belief system, she feels she has been able to communicate spiritually with her mother and have healing of that relationship. And that's not available to us as Christians. And it's really unfair, I think. And so it's just been a beautiful thing to watch her have that experience of like, oh, my mom isn't encumbered of the issues that made her difficult as when she was alive, and she's now free, and we can have this beautiful relationship together.
Yeah. And I think anything like that, even when it goes into mediumship or getting a reading, I never realized how healing that can be for people. And I see it as a service to society when you can do that and give that. And I think I have a Christian friend who's very much in the church, and she just looks at me and the gifts that I do. She says, God gives gifts in different ways. I believe this is your gift, and you're just giving it the way you understand. That is a Christian point of view, I think, when you can be loving and accepting of the different ways that God might work, right? In the Christian mindset, God works in mysterious ways. Why not through this?
Yeah. That's kind of how because obviously growing up Pentecostal, you see, I've had some very spiritual experiences that honestly kept me from deconstructing, because I was like, I use those as proof of everything that the pastor was saying was true, because look at these spiritual experiences. Clearly this is of God. Like, how would this happen otherwise? But now I have this more understanding. Like, I still believe those spiritual experiences were real, but that doesn't mean that those experiences aren't also happening outside the church, kind of like you were talking about earlier. And now I have this view of like a much more universal, God, that obviously, like, if God is the God of the universe, or whoever the being is, like, and they've created this entire, not just our planet, but the universe, which is massive. Like, obviously he's not going to only commune with this tiny percentage of evangelicals in the world. Like, he's going to be communing however, like, meeting us where we are, or she or they, or whoever it are. So that's been the hardest part for me, honestly, in deconstructing, is like, but I had those experiences. Like, how do I explain that outside of a Christian context? Because I don't. So like, I still have like very tiptoed. I've not done any witchcraft myself, but I have had my tarot read a few times. But I have been more curious about it, because like, what do I do with this like natural desire for these spiritual experiences, and like having spiritual gifts that there's really like no place to talk about that outside the church, unless you go into witchcraft, and then you have like the atheists in the middle. They're like, oh, you believe in Sky Daddy, like throwing it out there, like, but I don't know how to explain this otherwise, like all these things. And actually, I think it was John, someone in the chat had a question earlier on, before we go, what advice you would give to someone who's like a baby witch, or someone who's just like curious, like wanting to just kind of inch their way into witchcraft.
Yeah, I have. That's a super, super common question. Like, where do we start? And I'm new, and baby witches.
Can I piggyback a question on that too? Is there a danger? Can you connect to something?
Can you catch a demon?
Can you connect to a dark and evil spirit somehow?
I think a lot of that depends on your belief system. Now, one thing I do like to tell people, right, because my fear in the beginning was, oh my gosh, portal to hell, demons jump out, right? When I've gotten deeper into my learnings, I've read some really old occult books, some ceremonial magic stuff, which is like, there's high magic and low, there's all these like very intense things, right? Especially the 1900s early 1900s, late 1800s were rife with these magical texts and the Golden Dawn tradition and all of these things. One thing that I've learned is some people spend years of their life trying to summon a demon. Years. And they can't do it. or it takes a lot of skill and a lot of intent and a lot of energy to do that, right? It's not something that just happens when you pick up a tarot deck. If it did, you'd probably be one of the most gifted mages ever to exist, right? It's not that easy, and it's not what people think. Now, if, however, you go in with the belief that demons are everywhere, then you touch that tarot deck, any creak in your house, you're going to think it's haunted.
Mhm.
Any random noise, you're going to jump straight to the fear response rather than, oh, that's obviously a possum on the roof, right? So it just depends on sort of where you're coming into. Now, if something does feel really scary, take your time, because you don't actually want to re-traumatize yourself if you've got those religious fears there. So I suggest when people are starting out, firstly, figure out what is interesting to you, because there's so many different aspects. You don't have to read tarot to call yourself a witch, right? You don't have to do herbal tea infusions to call yourself a witch. There's no one way to be it. There's totally different ways. But if you're like, you know what, I just really like the aspect of connecting with nature, well, maybe read a book on paganism, right? That's really heavily nature-based, okay? Maybe you feel a call to an alternate deity. Now, this one was really hard for me because I was like, no, I've worked with a deity before. That was God. Not doing that again, right? And it took a long time to sort of come back from that. And I've changed the way I think about it, and it's more something called thought forms. But I also find looking at books on mediumship or a book on spiritual healing, or just starting with something really small and just going into that interest and forgetting all the rest. You don't have to do all of the rest. And then if you read it and you're like, oh, it didn't really feel right, fine, drop it. You don't need it. Try something else. Maybe try astrology. I would suggest if you're like, oh, I don't know about it. How can one star sign tell you, why there's not 12 personalities? That's what most people think. I'm also a professional astrologer. Astrologer is so much more than just 12 star signs. So have a look at something called your big three. It's your sun sign, your moon sign, and your rising sign. And if that resonates, you might be like, oh, wow, there might be something to this. Cool. Let's have a little bit of a deeper look, right? So just explore what is actually pulling you towards it. As I said, I've got a blog post, which is all about, I can send you the link if you want it as well. It's all about where to start as a witch. Like, where do I start with witchcraft?
Because witchcraft is really big, and just like Christianity, there's different sects and beliefs within it, and different types of witchcraft, and there's no one way.
There's no rules. There's unlike the Bible, there's no rules, right? There might be traditions that you can join, but you wouldn't be doing that straight off the bat, right? You would be starting much, much smaller. So there is really inclusive areas of witchcraft. That's one thing that drew me in. Very LGBTQIA plus affirming, which is exactly what I think we need. So especially if that's been something you've struggled with in the church, I certainly did, can be really, really healing to go to a space where that's not the case anymore.
If I can ask one last thing, is there an ethic for witchcraft? Like I always tell Christians when we're arguing about theology and they're like, I'll pray for you. And I'm like, oh, you're going to say an incantation so a mystical spirit will manipulate my beliefs. That's evil. And
against my consent.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And so is there that in the witchcraft of like manipulating with spiritual stuff?
Yeah, I would say there is that in everything, right? Doing something without someone's express consent is not right, in my opinion. The same goes for someone saying, I'll pray for you. It's like, well, no, I didn't ask for that. Right. And you don't actually have my best interests in heart, even though you think you do. I don't consent to you doing that, right? Same thing if I had a friend who was ill and I was like, oh, I'll light a candle for you. Hey, I'm not going to do that if my friends are Christian. I know they're not open to it. And if they're not, and they're someone that's more witchy, I still ask. I say, hey, would you like me to light a candle for you? Send you some healing vibes your way, right? It's the same idea as that. So I consider myself, I'm an ethical tarot reader, astrologer, and witch, right? I am very, morals are like a big core part of my value system. That's not everybody. And same with Christians, it's not everybody, right? So there are people who don't care, and that's out there. So I don't think
I say if a Christian really believes there's power in prayer and they pray for somebody without their consent, that is assault. It is.
And they can pray damage over people too.
Yeah.
Like terrible. You can pray that, you could say, I pray that God, destroys all of the things that this person's doing. I pray that God, forces them back to, like, you could put anything you want in that prayer. Oof. And when we talk Christian, we do, Stephanie says in the chat, where do we find your podcast? So it's called the Witch Talks Podcast. It's on Spotify. It's on YouTube. It's on Apple. It's on all of those places.
And I will put a link to your website in the show notes so people can find you easily.
And what's your
Awesome.
social media? Where can they find you?
On Instagram, it's suburban_witchery. And then everywhere else is suburban witchery. But Instagram's got the little underscore, and just be mindful of scammers, because I do have a lot of impersonator accounts, and they'll contact you and say, can I give you a reading? And those are the non-ethical ones. They're not legit. They try to fearmonger people into giving them money. A real reader will never DM anyone. It's all like, I have a professional business website. That's the only way you can book with me. So,
are you going to throw a shrimp on the Barbie today and feed your dingo?
So we don't call them shrimp over here, which is funny. We call them prawns. So we can put a prawn on the Barbie. That's actually quite nice. And no, we don't ride dingoes. We ride emus. It's a common misconception.
Gotcha. Very good. Well, awesome. Thanks for being with us, Hannah.
You are so welcome. And I hope that everyone who has been intrigued feels like they are safe to. There's nothing wrong with reading something and exploring it a little more. So I hope this has helped people to see that it's not all doom and gloom. It's not all demonic suffering over here.
Yes, as you're wearing like a bright flowery shirt too.
With my pink hair and my pink glasses. I'm bright and colorful, and
not the witch. This is not your grandma's witch.
You know what I would love to say. I'm reading some of the comments. Just the Bible says perfect love casts out fear. Like Christians should not be driven by fear. I don't think we always say the Bible is clear. I think the Bible is clear that fear gets taken out by love. If we love, we don't have to live in fear. And we're taught so much fear and shame, and you just get rid of the fear, guys. Move toward the love, and you're going to be okay.
Absolutely.
Okay. The Holy Spirit will guide you into all truth. All right. Thanks to everybody for hanging out. April, you have anything else?
No, thanks so much, Hannah. And we're going to be on break through the end of the month, and we'll be back in November.
Yeah. We have David Gushy coming on with us in November, a Christian ethicist and really interesting guy.
Yeah.
And so everybody enjoy Halloween.
Yes.
And maybe the weather's finally getting cooler where we are. By the way, I think we may have had an earthquake while I was on the air. I've been kind of trying to look for. There was one in the Bay Area earlier today. I've been trying to look online a little bit to see, because I sure felt like we had one while I was sitting here.
Oh, wow. Well, you played it off well.
Well, we're used to them here. We don't get big ones. We just get little rolls and rocks here in Fresno. So very good stuff. All right, Hannah, thanks. And thanks to all of you. And join our private group so we can get to 1,000 people in there, and invite your friends, your good friends, not the ugly, nasty ones. And we'll see you all again in a few weeks.